Hello, in this video we are going to talk about logic nodes. As we've discussed before, these nodes help you make decisions, encode or decode data, or make simple calculations. If you are familiar with programming, these nodes give you some of the functions you are already extremely familiar with, like conditionals, array manipulations, and even give you the ability to write JavaScript. In this video, we will examine some of the most used logic nodes. More specifically, we will talk about the conditional node, the latch node, the mutate node, and the function node. Once you are all done with this video, you will have a good understanding of how and when to use these nodes and other logic nodes. Let's dive in.
All right. The most common logic node has to be the conditional node. We've talked about this a lot already. So with it, you can perform your if-then logic. As we saw before, the conditional node only has one configuration option. It takes an expression and will evaluate this expression to determine what direction to branch the workflow. In this expression field, you can check for common operations like, is a payload path equal to a value? Is a payload path greater than another payload path? Is a payload path not equal to another value? We support all the basic programming operators. If you're curious, all the supported operators are in the documentation. The conditional node and branching are there to help you make decisions within the workflow engine. However, the conditional node is not the only type of branching node. There is the latch node. This node is a very handy conditional-like node. So let's say you are monitoring plants and reading data from a moisture sensor once a minute. Then, every minute, you want to check if your moisture level is below a certain threshold. If it's below this threshold, you want a notification letting you know that this plant needs to be watered. So, using what we already know about the workflow engine, we can easily build this to check. We can do this using the device state trigger, a conditional node, and an SMS node. However, there is one problem with this workflow. Since my data is reporting once a minute, this workflow will also be triggered once a minute. And every minute, it will check the value and send a text message. So, unfortunately, if the moisture is low, you'll get a text message every minute until the plant is watered. This is obviously not what we want. Instead, what we really want is one message when the moisture is low. So we need a conditional that allows us to check the moisture data, and when the value goes below our threshold, we only get one text message. Then, after we water the plant and the moisture level goes above the threshold again, if it ever goes back down, we want that message again. So overall, this is called one-time branching, and the latch node is how you do it within the workflow engine. The latch node has two main configuration properties: the latch expression and the reset expression. In our example, our latch expression is the same expression we had in the conditional node. Is my moisture level below my threshold? But instead of evaluating it every time like the conditional node, if our expression results to true, the latch node will do something special. It will latch to false. So once it detects our threshold warning and sends the text, the node will latch to false and we won't continue to get text messages. On the other hand, we also need to let the latch node know when it's okay to check for our conditional again. We need a way to reset it. This is where the reset expression comes in. Here we can check, is our moisture level back above the threshold? Then if it ever goes above, it will reset the node and then we will have our desired action. The latch node really makes it simple to do this one-time branching for cases like this. Along with the two expressions, the latch node has more advanced options that we can configure. It gives you the ability to add data about the latch node to the payload. For example, you can add the current state of the latch node to the payload. So in your workflow, you can have the information about is this latch node locked or not, and act upon it if need be. Lastly, we get a really powerful configuration called the latch identifier. For our example, we only had moisture data coming from one device. But what if you had 1,000 devices reporting? We need a way to tell the latch node that it needs to latch differently for each device. So if we put device ID here, we can make sure that the latch node state is tied to each specific device. To do so, we should just put trigger ID here because that's where our device ID is. Overall, the latch node has saved my inbox a lot of times. Okay, that's all for the latch node. Let's move on to a really simple node called the mutate node. It allows the workflow to perform arbitrary changes to the structure of the payload object. This node just lets you directly change the payload, and it's helpful in a bunch of different scenarios. You can configure it using one of 4 rules: set, remove, copy, and move. Set allows you to set new values onto the payload. Remove allows you to remove values from the payload. Copy allows you to duplicate a value of the payload. And move allows you to move the value of the payload from one place to another. The most important thing to know about this node is that you can actually have it execute multiple rules at once. When you do this, just know that it will execute each rule in the order that you define them. So just keep that in mind. The last node that we're going to talk about is the function node, which allows you to write vanilla JavaScript that manipulates the payload. Writing JavaScript gives you the ultimate power within the workflow engine. We really see the node being helpful in 3 main ways: custom data parsing, binary data parsing, and date manipulation. These are just the things that will be hard or pretty much impossible to do in the workflow engine, but you have the function node here to fill in the gaps. So first and foremost, the function node only supports JavaScript. So if you aren't familiar, there is a ton of resources online that I will include in this video's description to help you get up to speed. So now let's use it. The function node just has one configuration option, where we put our JavaScript. And when we execute your JavaScript, we give you a couple globals to help you modify the payload. The first one is called payload. It helps you interact with your payload data, which is the most important thing. So we could build some JavaScript that looks like this. Since it's a node's job to do something with the payload and pass it along, whatever the payload value is when this node is complete, we're going to pass that along to the next node. So that's how your function node can modify the payload. So in this case, we added a new item and changed one. These values will be reflected on our payload. Just as an FYI, if you guys are JavaScript experts, you may want to make sure you stick with synchronous actions within a function node. This node doesn't do well with asynchronous methods. So within the function node's configuration, there is another way that you can modify the payload, and this is using the return keyword. But please use this wisely. Whenever you use return, it will return this object and become the entire payload. So for example, if we return something like this, this will become the entire payload, and we lose all that other helpful information like the device ID, device name, that automatically comes within the workflow object. Normally, I stick with modifying the payload object like we talked about first. So the other globals that we provide are buffer and date. So the buffer global object helps you manipulate binary objects, and the date helps you manipulate dates within the function node. These two are very helpful for a number of cases. Pro tip, console log also works within the function node. If you console log something in the function node, it will appear in the debug panel. And that is all you need to know for the function node.
Okay, that is all for logic nodes. In this video, we just focused on some of the most popular ones, but there are plenty more to discover. Remember, the docs and forums are there to help. I'll see you in the next video.